The $2,000 question, why this update matters right now. If you're a senior living in the United States, chances are you've heard the same question repeated again and again over the past several months. Is the $2,000 check really coming, or is this just another rumor? Today's update matters because, for the first time, the conversation has shifted away from speculation and headlines and toward concrete signals coming directly from the White House. This is not a random social media claim. This is not a viral video with no source. What we're discussing in this series is based on statements from top economic officials inside the administration outlining a possible $2,000 payment that the president has referred to not as a stimulus check, but as a dividend-style payment. That distinction is important, and we'll explain why in this video. For seniors living on fixed income, every detail matters. Rising grocery prices, higher utility bills, increasing insurance costs, and the reality that Social Security adjustments often lag behind inflation have placed real pressure on household budgets. So when talk of a $2,000 payment resurfaces, it naturally raises hope and concern. The goal of this video is not to create excitement or fear. It's to give you clarity. We will walk through what has actually been confirmed, what remains uncertain, and why the timeline being discussed now is different from anything we've heard before. Most importantly, we'll separate what is possible from what is guaranteed, so you can make informed financial decisions without relying on rumors. This is part one of a 14-part breakdown designed to give you the full picture calmly and clearly. Where the money would come from, tariffs, revenue, and the new dividend idea. One of the biggest questions seniors ask is simple and reasonable. Where would this $2,000 payment actually come from? According to the White House, this proposal is not being framed as a traditional stimulus check. Instead, it's being described as a dividend-style payment funded by tariff revenue collected through recent trade policies. That difference matters. In past stimulus programs, payments were largely funded through emergency deficit spending. This time, administration officials are pointing to existing revenue, specifically money already flowing into the Treasury from tariffs, as the potential source. Over the past year, tariff collections have increased significantly. At the same time, economic data shows several months of government surplus and a noticeable reduction in the annual deficit compared to last year. From a policy perspective, that combination changes the conversation. Instead of asking, can the government afford to borrow more? The question becomes, is there room to redistribute revenue that already exists? That is why the president has repeatedly avoided the word stimulus and instead used the term dividend. The message being sent is this: if revenue is coming in strong, American households, especially those under financial pressure, could share in that return. For seniors on fixed income, this framing is important. It suggests the proposal is tied to broader economic performance, not just emergency relief. However, it's critical to understand one thing clearly. Even if the money exists, it does not move automatically. Congress still controls how federal revenue is spent. In the next part, we'll explain why congressional approval is the real gatekeeper, and why the timeline now being discussed is more specific than anything we've heard before. The White House signal. What changed behind the scenes? What makes this update different from earlier discussions is not just the amount being mentioned, it's who is now speaking and how confident the tone has become. Recently, the White House's top economic advisor publicly stated that earlier this year, he was uncertain whether there was enough room in the federal budget for a $2,000 payment. At that time, the answer was essentially, "We'll see." That answer has now changed. According to his latest comments, multiple factors have shifted behind the scenes. The U.S. economy has posted several consecutive quarters of strong growth, approaching 4%. At the same time, the federal government has experienced months of surplus, and the annual deficit has dropped sharply compared to last year. Taken together, those conditions create something Washington watches very closely: budget flexibility. This is why the language coming from the White House matters so much. Officials are no longer speaking in vague terms. Instead, they are acknowledging that the financial conditions required for a payment like this may now exist. For seniors, this shift is significant. It doesn't mean money is guaranteed, but it does mean the conversation has moved from unlikely to possible and being actively considered. Just as important, this message is coming from someone directly involved in economic decision-making, not from political commentators or outside speculation. In Washington, signals like this are rarely sent by accident. In the next part, we'll break down the most important word used in this update, proposal, and explain why that single word determines everything about timing, eligibility, and whether checks ever go out at all. Proposal versus promise. Why this is not a guarantee. One word appears repeatedly in the White House update, and it's a word seniors should pay close attention to. That word is proposal. A proposal is not a promise, and it is not a payment. When White House officials say they expect to bring a proposal forward, what they mean is that an official plan may be introduced to Congress for consideration. Nothing moves beyond that point unless lawmakers approve it. This distinction is critical, especially for retirees and seniors living on fixed income. Over the years, many Americans have been disappointed by headlines that sounded certain, only to fade away quietly. This update is different in tone, but the process remains the same. Even if the president supports the payment, even if economic conditions allow for it, even if the funding source exists, Congress must still agree. That means hearings, debate, possible changes, and ultimately a vote. In some cases, proposals are delayed. In others, the amount is reduced or eligibility rules are adjusted. So while this update is the strongest signal we've seen so far, it does not mean checks are being printed today or even this year. For seniors, this is where calm, careful planning matters. You should stay informed, but not rearrange your budget around money that has not yet been approved. In the next part, we'll explain why the timeline being discussed now, early 2026, is more precise than anything mentioned before, and how political timing plays a major role in when proposals actually move forward. The 2026 timeline, why early next year keeps coming up. One of the most important details in this update is the timing. Again and again, one phrase keeps being repeated, early 2026. That wording is not accidental. According to White House officials, the expectation is that a formal proposal could be introduced shortly after the new year begins. In Washington terms, that usually means the first several weeks of the legislative calendar, January through mid-February. Why does this window matter so much? Because once Congress moves past February, attention shifts quickly toward election season. Messaging hardens, negotiations slow down, and controversial spending proposals become much more difficult to advance. From a political standpoint, early 2026 represents the last realistic opportunity to introduce a major payment proposal while there is still time to debate it, vote on it, and potentially deliver funds before the next election cycle dominates everything. For seniors, this explains why officials are speaking more openly now rather than waiting. If this payment is going to move forward, it has to begin as a proposal early, not late. That timing also gives federal agencies enough room to prepare systems, process eligibility, and avoid delays that plagued earlier stimulus programs. But it's important to keep expectations grounded. An early 2026 proposal does not mean early 2026 payments. Even under a smooth process, payments would likely come months later, not weeks. Spring or early summer is the realistic window being discussed, assuming everything goes right. In the next part, we'll take a closer look at the group most concerned about this update: seniors, Social Security recipients, and people living on fixed income, and why income level matters more than work status. Who this is really for: income, not work. Status. One of the biggest points of confusion around this possible $2,000 payment is who would actually qualify. Many seniors hear the word stimulus and immediately worry it might exclude them, especially if they're retired, no longer working, or not filing taxes every year. According to what has been shared so far, that concern may be misplaced. The White House has been clear on one key principle: eligibility would be based on income, not employment status. In other words, it does not matter whether you are working full-time, retired, disabled, or unemployed. What matters is how much total income your household receives. The income level being discussed repeatedly is under $100,000 per year. That figure has come up consistently across multiple briefings and interviews. For seniors, this is critical. If you receive Social Security retirement benefits, SSI, SSDI, or veterans benefits, those payments do not automatically disqualify you. As long as your total income stays under the threshold, you could still be eligible. This also means that people who do not normally file tax returns are not automatically excluded. In previous stimulus programs, many seniors and disability recipients qualified even without traditional wage income. However, this does not mean no paperwork would be required. If this proposal moves forward, the government will still need a way to verify income and deliver payments. That process often relies on the most recent tax or benefit records available. In the next part, we'll walk through which specific groups are most likely included and why seniors, veterans, and people with disabilities are being mentioned so often in this discussion. Seniors, Social Security, and fixed income households. For many seniors, this possible $2,000 payment isn't about extra spending, it's about relief. Living on a fixed income means you feel inflation differently than working households do. When prices rise, your monthly check doesn't automatically adjust in real time. And even with cost of living increases, many seniors find that essentials, food, utilities, insurance, and medical expenses continue to outpace those adjustments. That's why this proposal has drawn so much attention from Social Security recipients. Based on what has been shared so far, receiving Social Security retirement benefits does not exclude someone from eligibility. The same applies to SSI, SSDI, and veterans benefits. These programs are considered sources of income, not disqualifying factors. The key issue remains the same: total annual income. If your combined income stays under the proposed threshold, you would still fall within the group being discussed. Age, work history, and employment status are not the deciding factors here. This is especially relevant for older Americans who no longer file taxes because their income falls below standard filing requirements. In previous payment programs, systems were created to include those individuals, and officials have indicated similar accommodations could apply again. However, it's important to remember that fixed income also means limited flexibility. Seniors should not plan upcoming expenses around money that has not yet been approved. In the next part, we'll look beyond seniors and explain why veterans, people with disabilities, and unemployed Americans are also central to this proposal, and why that broad eligibility could influence how Congress approaches the decision. Veterans, disability, and unemployed Americans. Why they're included. As this proposal has taken shape, one thing has become increasingly clear. This potential $2,000 payment is not aimed at just one group. Alongside seniors, veterans, people with disabilities, and unemployed Americans are repeatedly mentioned as part of the conversation, and for good reason. Many veterans rely on VA benefits as their primary source of income. These payments are often fixed, and like Social Security, they do not always keep pace with rising living costs. Officials have indicated that receiving VA benefits would not automatically disqualify someone, as long as their total income remains under the proposed limit. The same logic applies to people living with disabilities. Whether someone receives SSDI, SSI, or other disability-related benefits, the determining factor is still income, not the nature of the benefit itself. This matters because disability recipients often face higher out-of-pocket medical and daily living costs, leaving little room for unexpected expenses. Unemployed Americans are also part of this discussion. If someone's income dropped due to job loss or reduced hours, and their total earnings now fall under the threshold, they could be included as well. In many cases, unemployment creates sudden financial strain long before any long-term recovery begins. From a policy perspective, this broad eligibility serves a purpose. It frames the payment not as targeted aid for one demographic, but as temporary financial relief for households under pressure, regardless of age or work status. In the next part, we'll explain how Congress could actually move a proposal like this forward, and why a special legislative process may play a key role in whether this payment ever becomes reality. The congressional path, how this could actually get passed up to this point. We've talked about ideas, signals, and proposals. Now comes the most important reality check. No matter how supportive the White House may be, Congress controls the final outcome. For any $2,000 payment to move forward, lawmakers must formally approve the funding and the rules surrounding it. That includes who qualifies, how the money is delivered, and when payments can be issued. What makes this proposal interesting is the possible use of a legislative tool known as budget reconciliation. In simple terms, reconciliation allows certain bills related to taxes and spending to pass the Senate with a simple majority, rather than the usual higher vote threshold. That difference can dramatically change the odds of approval. Congress has already signaled that it plans to use this process for additional legislation in the coming years. If a $2,000 payment is included in one of those bills, it could move more quickly and face fewer procedural obstacles. From a political standpoint, this matters. A payment passed through reconciliation would allow the party in power to advance it without requiring broad bipartisan agreement. That makes timing and strategy especially important as election season approaches. For seniors, the takeaway is this: the pathway exists, but it is not automatic. Bills can change, amounts can be adjusted, eligibility rules can tighten or expand. In the next part, we'll discuss when payments could realistically arrive if everything moves forward, and why expectations should be measured in months, not weeks. Payment timing. When money could actually reach you. One of the most common questions seniors ask is also the most practical one. If this gets approved, when would the money actually arrive? Based on what we know so far, it's important to set realistic expectations. Even if a proposal is introduced in early 2026 and moves through Congress without major delays, payments would not be immediate. Federal programs do not operate on overnight timelines, especially when millions of households are involved. First, Congress would need to pass the legislation. Then the bill would need to be signed into law. After that, federal agencies, including the Treasury and the IRS, would need time to prepare payment systems, verify eligibility, and coordinate delivery. That process takes time. Officials familiar with similar programs suggest that, under a smooth and efficient rollout, payments would most likely arrive in the spring or early summer of 2026. That means months, not weeks, after a proposal is introduced. For seniors on fixed income, this distinction is critical. This potential payment should be viewed as possible future relief, not short-term cash you can rely on for immediate bills or upcoming expenses. Planning ahead means protecting yourself from disappointment if timelines shift or delays occur. It's also worth noting that payment methods would likely mirror previous programs. Direct deposit for those on file, followed by mailed checks or benefit-linked payments for others. In the next part, we'll focus on what seniors can do right now to be prepared, without stress, without panic, and without falling victim to misinformation or scams. What you should do now. Preparation, without panic. At this stage, the most important thing for seniors is not excitement. It's preparation without panic. Because while this $2,000 payment is not guaranteed, there are a few simple steps you can take now to avoid problems later if the proposal does move forward. First, make sure your information with federal agencies is up to date. That includes your current mailing address and, if you use it, your direct deposit information. In past payment programs, delays often happened simply because records were outdated or incomplete. Second, pay attention to your tax and benefit records. Even seniors who do not normally file taxes may still need to file a simple return if a payment is approved. That's how eligibility was verified in previous programs, especially for Social Security and SSI recipients. This does not mean you need to rush or file unnecessarily right now. It simply means staying informed and ready to act when official instructions are released. Third, be cautious, very cautious about scams. Whenever talk of government payments increases, so do fraudulent calls, emails, and text messages. Federal agencies will never ask for personal information over the phone or through unsolicited messages. If someone contacts you claiming they can speed up your payment or needs your details to secure your check, that is a red flag. Preparation means staying informed, organized, and calm, not making decisions based on fear or urgency. In the next part, we'll address one of the biggest risks during times like this: misinformation, and how to tell the difference between real updates and misleading headlines. Avoiding misinformation and payment scams. Whenever talk of government payments increases, something else increases as well: misinformation. For seniors, this can be one of the most stressful parts of the process. Headlines move fast. Social media posts sound urgent. Videos promise certainty before anything is official. And unfortunately, scammers know this. They rely on confusion and fear to pressure people into acting quickly, before checking facts. Here is the most important rule to remember. No federal agency will ever call, text, or email you asking for personal information to release a payment. Not the IRS, not Social Security, not the Treasury Department. If someone contacts you claiming your $2,000 payment is on hold, about to expire, or needs verification, that is a warning sign. These messages often create artificial urgency to trick people into sharing bank details or social security numbers. Another common tactic is misinformation disguised as good news. You may see claims that checks are already approved, going out this week, or guaranteed for all seniors. Right now, none of that is true. At this stage, everything hinges on a proposal that has not yet been introduced or passed. For seniors, the safest approach is simple. Rely only on official government announcements and trusted sources. Avoid clicking unknown links, and take your time. There is no action you can take today that will make a payment arrive faster. In the next part, we'll step back and look at the bigger picture. Why this update is still considered the most encouraging signal so far, even with all the uncertainty that remains. Why this update is still the most encouraging so far. With all the cautions, conditions, and unanswered questions, it's fair to ask, why are experts calling this the most encouraging update so far? The answer comes down to three important shifts. First, the tone from the White House has changed. Earlier in the year, officials openly questioned whether there was room in the budget for a payment like this. Now, they are saying the opposite, that recent economic growth, reduced deficits, and months of surplus have created space that did not exist before. That shift in confidence matters. Second, the timeline is no longer vague. Instead of sometime in the future or we'll see, officials are pointing to a specific window, early 2026, for introducing a formal proposal. In Washington, narrowing the timeline usually means real internal planning is already underway. Third, there is a clear legislative pathway. The possibility of using budget reconciliation gives this proposal a realistic route through Congress, rather than leaving it stalled by procedural hurdles. That does not guarantee success, but it does increase the odds compared to earlier discussions. For seniors, this update represents progress, not certainty. It means the idea has moved from talk to planning, from speculation to structure. At the same time, it does not change the most important rule of financial security. Never depend on money until it is approved and delivered. Hope should be balanced with caution. In the final part, we'll bring everything together: what seniors should realistically expect, what not to assume, and how to stay financially steady while waiting for official decisions. The bottom line: what seniors should expect moving forward. As we close this 14-part breakdown, it's important to step back and look at the full picture, calmly and realistically. Right now, there is no guaranteed $2,000 payment, there are no checks being sent out today, and there is no action required immediately. What does exist is something meaningful, a clear signal from inside the White House that a proposal is being actively considered, with a defined timeline and a realistic legislative pathway. For seniors, that distinction matters. This update does not promise relief, but it does suggest that decision-makers are paying attention to the financial strain facing households on fixed income. Rising costs, medical expenses, and everyday necessities have made even small changes feel significant. If a proposal is introduced in early 2026, the months that follow will determine everything: eligibility rules, payment size, and whether Congress ultimately approves the plan. Until then, the best approach is steady and practical. Stay informed, but avoid sensational headlines. Keep your records up to date, but don't rush into unnecessary filings. Protect yourself from scams and never share personal information based on unofficial messages. Most importantly, continue planning your finances based on what you already have, not on what might come later. If this payment becomes reality, it can provide helpful support. If it does not, your stability should not depend on it. That balance between awareness and caution is the strongest position any senior can take moving forward. Thank you for staying informed and for taking the time to understand the facts clearly and calmly.